Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text.
Usually when we talk about medicine, there's like a deeply satisfying visibility to it, right? I mean, if a patient fractures a tibia, the x-ray shows a clean white break.
Right. You could literally point at it.
Exactly. You point and say, there's the problem. It's just binary. Broken or not broken.
Yeah. We naturally prefer threats that we can, see and isolate. It makes the whole intervention feel incredibly straightforward.
But the reality of stepping onto a bustling hospital floor is that, well, your biggest enemy is completely invisible. You are dealing with these microscopic pathogens that coat like every seemingly clean surface.
Oh, absolutely. The bed rails, the IV poles, the surgical instruments, and most importantly, your own hands.
Right. And surprisingly, the chemical weapons we use to fight these pathogens on the outside of the body are, they're entirely different from the antibiotics we use on the inside.
It is an entirely different pharmacological battlefield. I mean, the agents we rely on for environmental and topical control are often just far too toxic to be ingested.
Like, you could never administer them intravenously.
Never. But understanding their specific mechanisms of action and, their limitations is the absolute foundation of keeping your patients safe.
So if you are a nursing student prepping for clinicals, making sense of this invisible battlefield is literally your first line of defense. Today, we are focusing entirely on the pharmacology of antiseptics and disinfectants.
Such a crucial topic.
It really is. We're going to do a deep dive straight into Chapter 101 of Lane's Pharmacology for Nursing Care, the 12th edition. We're translating that dense science into plain language so the reasoning behind your safe medication decisions clicks instantly.
And we're going right by the book, unpacking the therapeutic goals and nursing implications exactly as they appear in the text.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because while these drugs aren't taken internally, they are your absolute front line.
They really are.
Okay.
And the best place to start is by drawing a very strict line between two terms that are, frankly, dangerously misused in everyday conversation.
Oh, antiseptic versus disinfectant.
Exactly. In a clinical setting, an antiseptic and a disinfectant are not interchangeable at all. An antiseptic is formulated specifically for application to living tissue.
Right, so like skin.
Yes, mostly prophylactic.
Yeah.
But a disinfectant is applied exclusively to inanimate objects.
So the chemical concentration in a disinfectant is just fundamentally too harsh, too toxic for human skin or tissue.
Right, and that toxicity is necessary, to decontaminate surgical instruments or cleanse the actual hospital facilities.
Whereas antiseptics are what you'd use to prep a patient's skin before inserting a central line or just washing your own hands.
Precisely. Now, another distinction nurses must know is sterilization versus sanitization.
Because I see those thrown around constantly on, cleaning products.
We all do. But clinically, sterilization is an absolute state. It means the complete, unequivocal destruction of all microorganisms.
Including those super resilient bacterial spores, right?
Exactly. Everything is gone. Sanitization, however, just means that contamination has been reduced to a level that meets general public health standards.
Okay, so it's just a reduction, not a total wipeout.
Exactly. And when looking at the drugs themselves, you'll see labels like germicide versus germistatic.
Germicide outright kills the bug, right? Like bactericides for bacteria or virucides for viruses.
You've got it. A germistatic drug, on the other hand, takes a different approach. It only suppresses the growth and replication.
It basically pauses them, just holds them at bay without actually killing them.
Right. So knowing all that, what would the ideal agent look like?
Oh, if we could play mad scientist. I mean, I'd want something germicidal, totally safe for human tissue, and with a massive broad spectrum, like wipes out bacteria, spores, viruses, fungi all at once.
Don't forget acting instantly, leaving no stains, having no odor, and never triggering microbial resistance.
That sounds like magic. Does that exist?
Unfortunately, no. No single chemical agent possesses all those properties.
Which means we have to really understand the specific quirks of the imperfect drugs we do have.
Exactly. And a huge part of that is the time course of action. Toxicity to microorganisms is deeply dependent on exposure time.
That feels like a massive nursing implication right there. It's not just what you use, but how long it sits on the surface.
The clinical data from the text illustrates this perfectly. If you apply a 70% ethanol solution to the skin, it reduces the cutaneous bacterial count by 50% in a brisk 36 seconds.
36 seconds. Okay, pretty fast.
But if you switch to a different agent like benzalkonium chloride, At a standard 1 to 1,000 dilution, achieving that exact same 50% reduction takes 7 full minutes.
Wow, 7 minutes is an eternity on a busy floor.
It really is.
You can't just swipe a surface, count to 3, and assume it's clean. You have to respect that exposure time.
And you also have to respect the physiological state of the tissue. Which brings us to a major point in the chapter about treating infection versus prophylaxis.
Yeah, this actually always confused me. If I have a patient with a gnarly local wound infection, shouldn't we just pour an antiseptic right on it?
It's such a common instinct, right? But the text gives a clear directive. Systemic agents are far superior for established local infections.
Like oral or IV antibiotics.
Yes, because antiseptics have incredibly poor penetration into deep tissue. Plus, their activity is heavily weakened by wound exudate.
Oh, so the pus and serum basically block the chemical.
Exactly. And worse, antiseptics damage the already inflamed tissue, which impairs the body's natural healing.
So if antiseptics are bad for active cuts, their real value is strictly preventing infections.
Right. And there's this specific landmark study in the textbook involving hexachlorophene that proves this.
Oh, I remember this. They took like 5,000 preoperative patients and bathed them in this powerful antiseptic.
Meticulously bathed them.
Okay.
And it drastically reduced the surface bacteria on their skin.
But then when they tracked the outcomes, it didn't reduce the post-op infections at all.
Zero effect.
So what does this all mean? If cleaning the patient doesn't stop the infection, where is the infection coming from?
It comes from the environment. The environmental microbes introduced into the sterile field, not the patient's own skin flora.
Wow. So applying antiseptics to the nurse's hands and disinfecting the instruments protects the patient way more than scrubbing the patient.
Infinitely more. It's all about breaking those vectors.
Okay, so now that we know where to attack the microbes, let's look at the specific chemical families outlined in Table 101.1 of the text, starting with the alcohols.
The most ubiquitous ones: ethanol and isopropanol.
How exactly is ethanol killing these bugs?
The mechanism of action is, well, it's brutal. Ethanol kills by precipitating bacterial proteins and dissolving the lipids in their cellular membranes.
So it's basically physically destroying the cell structure.
Right. And because it's structural destruction rather than, attacking a metabolic pathway, bacteria cannot develop genetic resistance to it.
That's a huge plus, but it does have limits, right?
It's lethal to most viruses and bacteria, but absolutely inactive against spores.
Like C. diff. It won't touch C. diff.
Exactly. And there is a massive textbook warning, a real safety alert regarding ethanol. Do not apply it to open wounds.
Yeah, because it coagulates proteins. I always think of it like dropping a raw egg white into a hot pan. It just instantly cooks and forms a physical shield.
That is the perfect visual. It creates a mass, and under that mass, the bacteria can safely thrive and multiply.
You're basically building a fortress for the infections.
Which is why ethanol is strictly for intact skin.
And what about the dosing? 70% is the magic number, not 100%, right?
Right. Water is actually required for that protein precipitation process to happen. Pure 100% ethanol would just dehydrate the cell without killing it.
Makes sense. Now, what about isopropanol? Like rubbing alcohol? Is it the same?
Mostly. It's slightly more germicidal at concentrations above 70%, but it causes local vasodilation.
Oh, so it increases blood flow right where you rub it.
Right. So if you prep a site with it right before a needle puncture, it can actually increase bleeding.
That's a super practical nursing implication. Okay, so if alcohols can't kill spores, what do we use for instruments that need to be completely sterilized?
For instruments, we move to the aldehydes, glutaraldehyde and formaldehyde.
The heavy hitters.
Exactly. Glutaraldehyde, you might see it as Cidex plus 28, is a harsh sterilizer for things like respiratory gear or catheters.
And it kills everything.
Everything. Bacteria, viruses, and, yes, spores. But, and this is a big but, it takes a whopping 10 hours of immersion to kill spores.
10 hours? That's a whole shift.
And that's only after you've manually removed all blood and organic matter first.
Oh!
Plus, it's finicky to handle.
It needs an alkaline pH to work, right?
Yes. And once you make it alkaline, it's only active for about 2 to 4 weeks. You also need adequate ventilation because the respiratory fumes are intense.
Yikes. So what about formaldehyde? Is that better?
Actually, it's worse. It acts even slower, taking 2 to 4 days for spores, and it's way more volatile and irritating.
Okay, so glutaraldehyde is definitely the better choice there. Let's move from the aldehydes to the halogens, iodine and chlorine.
Iodine has been the standard for so long. It oxidizes microbial structures, making it incredibly broad spectrum.
But the textbook makes a huge deal about the difference between iodine solution and iodine tincture.
It's a critical difference. They both use elemental iodine, but the solvent changes everything.
Right, an iodine solution is water-based, but a tincture contains 47% ethanol.
Exactly. And the mechanism is tricky because only the free dissolved elemental iodine, which is about 0.15%, is the active germicide. The rest is just a reservoir.
So how do you choose? Well, the text says you use the tincture for intact skin, like an IV prep, because the alcohol helps with the initial kill.
But you'd never use it on a wound.
Right, because 47% alcohol on broken skin would burn horribly. You have to use the water-based solution for broken skin.
Exactly. Now, what about iodophores, like povidone iodine or betadine?
Those are everywhere on the supply cards.
They are. An iodophore is just iodine complex with a polymer.
But the polymer itself doesn't kill anything, right?
No, it just acts as a slow-release reservoir for the iodine. Because of that, it actually has lower free iodine than a tincture, so it's technically less effective.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, but because it's so gentle on the tissue, it remains incredibly popular for surgical scrubs.
Okay, let's talk about the other halogens, the chlorine compounds, like oxychlorophene sodium.
Right, also known as chloropactin. It's great for drug-resistant localized infections like irrigating empyemas or fistulas.
But what about regular sodium hypochlorite, bleach?
Standard 5% household bleach is way too strong, but a highly diluted 0.5% solution is actually used to irrigate necrotic tissue.
But the nursing implication there is you must rinse it off promptly to avoid tissue damage.
Exactly. And a 1% solution is used for equipment. Just remember, bleach solutions must be mixed fresh.
Got it. Okay, moving on to chlorhexidine. Table 101.2 in the text breaks down these products like hibiclins.
Chlorhexidine is fantastic. It's fast-acting. At low doses, it disrupts membranes. At high doses, it precipitates proteins.
And it has this absolute superpower. It leaves a residue on the skin for continuing germicidal effects.
That persistent barrier is exactly why it is the preferred agent for central venous catheters. Very safe topically.
Though I think the text mentioned a rare case of hemolysis if accidentally injected by IV.
Right, something to be aware of.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Hydrogen peroxide.
The great myth.
I mean, we all grew up pouring it on scraped knees, watching it bubble, thinking it was melting the bacteria. But the text drops a bombshell. It is useless as an antiseptic.
Completely useless on living tissue.
Wait, really? Why? What about the bubbles?
The active part of peroxide is the hydroxyl free radical. But human tissue contains an enzyme called catalase.
Oh, and the catalase destroys the free radicals.
Instantly. The second it touches the wound, it's neutralized. The bubbles are just harmless oxygen gas being released.
So it's not killing anything.
Not a single microbe. The only benefit in a wound is that the physical frothing can loosen debris.
That is wild. So it's only actually effective as a disinfectant for instruments where there's no catalase.
Exactly. A 3 to 6% solution works well for inanimate objects.
Okay, my mind is blown. Let's cover benzalkonium chloride, or BAC.
BAC is an organic quaternary ammonium compound. It disrupts membranes, but it's slow, has a limited spectrum, and it has a fatal flaw.
Right, the soap issue. The text screams about this nursing implication. It is completely inactivated by ordinary soap.
If even a microscopic trace of soap remains, the BAC is useless. Nurses must meticulously rinse with water, then 70% alcohol, just to clear the soap before applying BAC.
Because it's so high maintenance and can cause tissue injury if too concentrated, the text says it's basically no longer recommended as an antiseptic.
Right, it's mainly just used for storing instruments now. And even then, it absorbs to porous materials like sponges, so the concentration drops and you have to replenish it.
That sounds like a hassle. Okay, we've talked so much about protecting the patient by keeping the environment clean, which brings us perfectly to the final section of Chapter 101, the CDC Hand Hygiene Guidelines.
The ultimate nursing implication.
The stakes are just terrifying. The text notes 2 million hospital-acquired infections yearly, leading to 90,000 deaths.
And hand transfer by healthcare workers is the leading cause.
Which is why the CDC strongly recommends alcohol-based rubs for routine use over traditional soap and water.
It's just so much more accessible. Plus, it has emollients, so it causes less skin damage, and it reduces bacterial counts much faster.
They actually estimated it saves a massive amount of time. Like an ICU nurse could save an entire hour per 8-hour shift just by using alcohol rubs instead of walking to a sink.
But of course, there are crucial exceptions.
Right. When us and nurse use soap and water.
2 main situations. First, Alcohol does not kill spores, like C. diff or Bacillus anthracis.
So if your patient has C. diff, alcohol won't protect you.
Not at all. Second, alcohol cannot remove visible dirt, blood, or proteinaceous material.
Because it can't penetrate the organic matter.
Exactly. In those cases, you need the physical friction of soap and water to mechanically remove the spores and flush them down the drain.
It's physical removal, not chemical killing.
Right. And looking at Table 101.3 in the CDC guidelines, there are mandatory situations for decontamination.
Like before and after patient contact.
Before putting on sterile gloves, after removing gloves, and even when moving from a contaminated site to a clean site on the same patient.
And there's a big safety alert here. Antimicrobial wipes or towelettes are not a substitute for alcohol rubs or soap.
They just don't do the job. Now, technique matters. For alcohol, you must rub until completely dry.
And for soap and water.
Rub vigorously for at least 20 seconds.
And avoid hot water, right? Because it causes dermatitis, which creates cracks in your skin for bugs to hide in.
Exactly. Oh, and always use a paper towel to turn off the faucet so you don't recontaminate your hands.
What about surgical scrubs? Is it still that brutal 10-minute scrub we see in movies?
Actually, that's outdated. A 2 to 6 minute scrub is completely sufficient now.
Good to know. Finally, nails and gloves. The text is very strict. Absolutely no artificial nails.
Category IA recommendation. The subungual area under the nail is a massive pathogen harbor. Natural tips must be under a 1/4 inch.
And for gloves, remove them after care and never ever wash them for reuse.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, placing those foam alcohol dispensers at every single doorway, which is an administrative mandate, directly correlates with the time-saving pharmacology of alcohols we discussed earlier.
It's amazing how it all ties together. To quickly summarize our journey through Chapter 101, we learned that systemic treatments beat topical antiseptics for local infections. We saw how alcohols physically destroy cells, why glutaraldehyde is for instruments, and how iodine and chlorine fit into practice.
And we busted the peroxide myth.
Yes, keep peroxide off human cuts. Plus, we learned exactly how to apply CDC hand hygiene rules.
You know, it leaves you with a really provocative thought to ponder.
What's that?
Well, as we develop more and more advanced chemical agents, they still fail against things like C. diff spores. So, will the simple mechanical act of physically creating friction while washing our hands remain our most irreplaceable defense?
Wow. Even with all our medical tech, it still comes down to the friction of a nurse's hands. That is incredible. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. From everyone on the Last Minute Lecture team, we genuinely appreciate you taking the time to study with us today.
Good luck with your clinicals.
Yes, we wish you the absolute best of luck on your nursing journey. You've got this.